Hi everyone, so today I'm going to talk about FIRE and what it means and how you can join the FIRE community if you so desire. So firstly, FIRE stands for Financially Independent Retire Early, and it's kind of a bit of a buzzword that people have been thrown around basically since the 90s, off the back of a study called the Trinity study, which was actually for something completely different, which I'll go into more detail on that, don't worry. So FIRE is essentially people who want to retire early, which is a pretty nice place to be. And there's kind of a simple equation that people use to calculate their FIRE number, which you might have heard of. And their FIRE number, just to break it down, is essentially how much money they would need to be able to retire. So they might have an idea in their head, they want to retire in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, below the national retirement age. That tends to be what people try and focus on with the FIRE community. I'll talk to you how to get to your FIRE number if you're kind of curious to work it out for yourself, if you want to kind of join this early retirement brigade. So how you work it out is you calculate your monthly expenses and what you will need to survive basically when you retire. So everyone's is different. It depends on where you live in the world, how expensive you want to live, basically, how lavishly you want to live. But just as a basic example, if it costs you £2,000 to live a month at the moment and you want to carry that on when you retire, what you do is, to get your FIRE number, is you multiply your monthly expenditure by 12. So there's 12 months in the year. So in this £2,000 example, multiply by 12, your annual expenditure is about £24,000 in this example. So to get to your FIRE number, you multiply your annual expenses times 25. And I'll go into the reason as to why it's 25 in a second. So in this example, 24 times 25, that will be your FIRE number. Or another example, if your annual expenditure is 40,000 a year, if you multiply that by 25, you will need £1 million in your retirement pot to be able to retire comfortably. Now, to break down why you multiply this by 25, this all reverts back to a Trinity study that was done in the 90s in America in a university called Trinity in Texas. And essentially what they did the study for was to understand how much you could withdraw basically every year to live off a pot of money that was invested in the stock market. So in this study, they worked on the S&P 500, which is an American bucket of companies. So essentially, S&P 500 looks at the 500 top companies in North America, and that's what the study was done in the 90s on. And what they found out from that study was essentially, over a 30-year time frame, the most successful rate of withdrawal of that money was about 4%. And this is where you hear about the 4% rule, which is similar to getting your FIRE number at multiplied by 25. So 1 divided by 25 is the 4% rule. So it's all the same thing essentially. So the FIRE movement was kind of born out of this understanding of the results of the Trinity study. Hopefully I haven't lost you there, but if you're confused at all, just drop a comment below and I'll happily explain it in more detail. So you may be thinking in that example that I just did of £40,000 a year multiplied by 25 is you need £1 million of a pot of money to retire early. That's all well and good, but how the hell do you get to £1 million, you might be thinking, which is a fair question. So in this very kind of lavish example of needing 40 grand a year, which actually is not that lavish, it depends on what part of the world you live in. But in that example, the majority of people would tend to use the stock market. So it could be an index fund that you're investing into. So every month you're putting in a chunk of money and you're allowing it to compound over time. So you're allowing compound interest to do its thing. And that is a much better way than just saving in a normal savings account, because with a normal savings account, sometimes the interest rates are not great, like 2%, mine is 4% at the minute, my high yield savings account, which is okay. It's not the worst, but it's not the best either. Whereas if you put your money into the stock market, for example, the S&P 500, which is an index fund, and as I said, looks at, the 500 top companies in America. Based on previous years, it tends to return about 8% to 10% a year. Now, obviously, historical data doesn't necessarily mean it's going to perform that way in the future. And you really have to be aware of that when you're getting into the stock market, and definitely don't do anything that you don't understand. It's really important to read up on these things and to get a grip of it, and then, you know, let it run in the background and do its thing. There are also lots of different types of FIRE. So in that £1 million pod example, that might be, you know, the best case scenario to live off 40 grand a year. But maybe, you know, you feel like you can live off half of that, you know, so £500,000, so £24,000 every year, or that would be £2,000 a month. So when you break it down, you know, if you don't live in a big city, or maybe you split your costs with someone, you know, these are all kind of ways to figure out, okay, hey, maybe I can retire a little bit earlier than I originally thought. And there's lots of different types of FIRE, so I'll go through the different types, and maybe there's a bucket that you feel really resonates with you. So the different types of terms that people use are fat FIRE, lean FIRE, coast FIRE, and barista FIRE, which is one I've heard recently, which is interesting. So I'll go through what they mean. So the fat FIRE is essentially what your view would be if you lived very luxuriously when you retired, if you were able to go on holidays, able to eat out, live the life that you really want to live. They call this fat FIRE. So that's like the best case scenario of a pot of money, and is the biggest pot of money that people have a goal towards who are in the FIRE community. Next up is lean FIRE, and what this means is you figure out how you're able to live completely lean. So really reduce your expenses, live like on the bare minimum, just cover your needs and a little bit of wants. So for example, if you currently spend $3,000 a month, and that's, you know, covering all your needs, covering your wants, but also a little bit of extra holidays here and there, but nothing too luxurious. Let's say your lean then is maybe $2,000 a month, and maybe your fat FIRE is like $5,000 a month. And this is how you distinguish, okay, how can I figure out essentially how to live off a bucket of money, but maybe for less. So that's why people go into the lean FIRE movement, because they need to get to a lower number than the fat FIRE number, but they can still retire and kind of live off the bare minimum per se, but not having to work. They're still able to retire early. So with coast FIRE, what this actually means is you get to coast on the earnings that you've made with your compound interest. So for example, coast FIRE, you could invest, let's say you start at age 20, you invest every month religiously up to age 35, and let's say you don't put in any more money into your index fund from the age of 35 to 45, so there's 10 years there where interest is still growing, but you're not having to put in that money. So they may, you know, have a part-time job, or they may, you know, reduce their hours before hitting their big, you know, coast FIRE number. It's really up to them, and there's a lot of leeway in a lot of these methods. You can kind of pick and choose how you want to play it. So with barista FIRE, what it's basically saying is you can get a job as a barista, for example, that maybe pays £1,000 a month. So let's go back to that example of you want to live on £2,000 a month, you know, every month in your retirement age, okay? So that's the example. But let's say you get a barista job that pays you £1,000 a month. So you only need another £1,000 to cover your expenditure. £1,000 multiplied by 12, that's £12,000 multiplied by 25 is X. So you need a lot smaller pot of money to live in the barista FIRE, you know, movement essentially. And it's really clever because it's like, you might go part-time, you might work 3 days in a barista. They say barista, but it's basically something that's pretty easy, or something that you're really passionate about that doesn't pay that well. So you could be, for example, working with pets, or you could be working with kitties, or you could be working, you know, in an art gallery, for example, part-time. And this, I think, is the most appealing, and it does seem appealing to me as well in later years, to maybe, hey, at age 40, you go to a barista style job that tends to cover a lot of healthcare, which is really good for US. I think the barista FIRE movement is quite big in the US because of the medical bills, etc. So they get a job that will cover healthcare insurance for them. So really smart. You'll still have benefits where you get paid holiday. You could still kind of, you know, lock in pensions, things like that. It's quite an interesting option where you're kind of half retired, but you're doing something that's pretty easy or something that's really fun that will cover that, let's say that £1,000 a month from a part-time job, and then the other 1,000 a month you're withdrawing from your stock investments. So those are the main types of FIRE that I've heard of anyway. If you've heard of any more, please drop it down in the comment. Please share what they mean, because there's so many terms popping up lately. It's always good to stay educated on what people are talking about. So a lot of people kind of lean into the FIRE movement because they're, they might be in their 20s. I'm in my 30s, and I heard about this FIRE movement when I was 30, basically. So I'm a little bit late to the game. The best thing about, the FIRE movement is the younger you are, the better. So the more years that you have to do compound interest in investments is a bit of a win, really. But you can still do it in your 30s. And I know people who have done it in their 30s as well. There's lots of YouTube channels on here where people have actually retired early based on this method. The big win of being in the FIRE community is, yes, you may have to sacrifice some short-term pleasures, like maybe you don't go on a holiday next year, maybe you don't buy the brand new handbag right now because you want to save that or invest that instead, or maybe you really have to budget everything that you're spending so that you can save a big chunk of your income every month. But what that means is, if maybe for the next 10 years you're really gung-ho on investing, you really save the majority of your money and pop into investment account or put into property even. This means that you're able to retire, way younger. You can go and do whatever you want then. Let's say you're retired at 40. You could travel the world for years and years and work off of this withdrawal method, which is the 4% rule, is what they tend to call it, where you withdraw 4% every year from those investments. There is a lot of detail with this Trinity study, the 4% rule, so it's really good to read up more about it, because the study was done on a 30-year time frame. So if you retire at age 30 and then, need that money past the age of 60, the withdrawal rate becomes lower and lower. So it's really important to kind of understand the nitty-gritty of the 4% rule, that you may have to adjust your expenditure year on year depending on how the stock market flows. But the beauty of it is, I really love the term FIRE. I think it's a really interesting concept. And to use the 4% rule as like a rule of thumb, not like, absolute 100% rule that will work every time. It's more of a concept, and to really kind of understand how to utilize your money, and that you don't need to be stuck in the rat race forever. You don't need to be stuck in that job that you may hate. It's okay to have these big term plans that you can lean towards. Why do people want to get into the FIRE movement? Honestly, it's all about freedom and choice. It's about maybe not fully even retiring, maybe just going into more of their passion projects that they don't necessarily have to rely on, for money, that they already have a pot of money sitting in their stocks or sitting in their bank account. But once you get that concept of your annual expenditure times 25, that is your FIRE number. That's the amount of money that you will need in your stocks, in, investments, after real estate, after you, sell, whatever way you want to do it. I think stocks are best because you just pop money in, let it grow over time, let compound interest do its thing. I think that's kind of the best and slightly safest way of doing it over time. And there's lots of different ways to do this. You could have side hustles and put all of that income into investments. You could definitely be more frugal and, maybe look at all of your bills. Like, are you paying too much on electricity? Maybe change provider. Are you spending too much on food and throwing it out at the end of the month? Spend less on groceries. There's ways around things that I think you'd be really surprised when you really drill into what you're spending your money on. And hey, if this is a goal where you want to retire early, you want to retire by your 40s, maybe you're 20 now, that's so doable. Like, that's so doable. If you've got time in your hands, you're laughing, you're flying away with this, because time is your friend with investing. So that's it in a nutshell. Thanks for listening. If you've any comments, please drop them down below. And it's really something that's really quite an interesting concept, and that's accessible to anyone if they were really, gung-ho about it, and if they had extra side hustles and extra money to put into this special pot of money to get to their FIRE numbers. So let me know if this is something that you're thinking about, if you're part of the community, if you've literally just heard about it, let me know. But yeah, thanks for listening everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.